From KBIA and the New Territory with PRX, this is Rivertown, a celebration of the Missouri River and how it shapes the people and places it flows through. I'm Tina Casagrande-Foss, and this is Episode 5, Take Me to the River. This is the last episode in our series, for now. If you haven't heard our previous episodes, go back and listen. We talked to artists and paddlers, scientists and historians, and we honored the sacredness of the river. In this episode of Rivertown, we're doing something a little different. I'm turning things over to Rivertown producer Tadeo Ruiz. Tadeo is pretty new to Missouri, and he's been surprised to learn about how much people here love the Missouri River. In his hometown of Mexico City, Mexico, he didn't know anyone who made art inspired by a river, or who paddled one for fun. In fact, he says the closest he came to aquatic nature was the water coming out of his tap. But during his reporting for Rivertown, he started to feel connected with one Missouri river town in particular.
My whole life, I've been afraid of rivers. As a young child in Mexico, I heard about legends like La Llorona, the weeping woman who lures children to the river to drown them. Pair that with consistent television coverage of bodies being recovered from the shallow river depths, and you get yourself a terrified kid. But flash forward 20 years to me, standing on the bank of the Missouri River on the edge of the town of Rocheport. The word is French for Port of Rocks, and was named that way by a French monk, who was among the first to settle here. Rocheport is built on the side of a hill. All the houses look over the flowing water. It was my first time being so close to a river as big as the Missouri. My heart rate let me know that I was getting too close. But I was there on a mission, to get to know this river and this town, even if it scares me. As I walked through town, I noticed a book of poetry called Endless River sitting on the windowsill of a coffee shop. It was written by a man named Brett Duffer, who you've met in this podcast before. He wrote the Katy Trail guidebook. Here's the beginning of the poem that the book is named for. Touching this flow, this is as close as touching birth. This is as close as touching heaven, as touching yesterday, tomorrow. This is as close as touching memories, the palpable essence of loved ones, life itself. Brett knows the river like other people know their mothers, their brothers, their friends. He knows the river with love. This was a perspective I hadn't seen before, so I decided to ask if Brett could show me around town. On one cool October day, we met up in Rocheport near Brett's home, and right next to the river.
I chose Rocheport absolutely because of the river, the trail, and of course the little town of Rocheport is absolutely charming and beautiful, and there's so many wonderful people that live here that have a similar passion for historic preservation, history, nature, you name it.
Brett grew up in Missouri, but he didn't imagine he'd stay forever. After college, he traveled through Central and South America, backpacking across unknown territory and seeing sights beyond his imagination. Eventually, the river called him home.
And it has ignited a love and a curiosity in me that has never left, thankfully. And it seems like every time I think I've unlocked all of its mysteries, I find some other huge, completely new layer of history or culture or beauty that I have yet to completely embrace, and so it's been sort of a lifelong love affair.
You know, where did this all start?
Is that my neighbor Dawn? Hey Dawn, how are you doing? Good. They're interviewing me for the J School. Yeah, how you been? Good.
In a small town with a population of 200 people, it's hard not to bump into your neighbors, who in turn become your friends.
Yeah, it's fun. Enjoy your walk. It's a perfect night.
Thank you. That's what I was thinking.
Heck yeah. Good for you.
I'm surprised by the interaction. When everything is pre-packaged for you in the big city, it's easy to forget we came from small origins.
There was a time in which we were very tribal and we were very small, and small units protected one another and they made their livelihoods together, and families and extended families grew there. And there was a kind of unit size that was manageable, not only for survival, but for prosperity.
Timothy Carson is a professor at the University of Missouri. I actually took one of his classes. I was surprised to learn that he, too, lived in Rocheport.
So in a sense, I think there's a kind of back to the future thing, a kind of returning to this simplicity of these basic units. That's what it feels like to me. Rocheport, like many other communities along the river, are rich with history. So much history gathered around the river for tens of thousands of years. So Native Americans lived in our area, and we still find their artifacts. Basically, all of the major epochs of history that we know about transpired around the river, including the Civil War, the American Civil War, because Missouri was a swing state, and so the war was going on, and they were crossing back and forth across the river on ferries. It's almost fantastical to think about the fact that we were embroiled in a war, and where I live in Rocheport, it was happening right there.
Are those things you think about constantly when you're out there? You're looking around and you sort of like have hypothetical flashbacks. Everything turns into like a colonial.
I do think about that history. I think about the history of slavery in the United States. You can't avoid the Civil War by looking at, and we are exactly in a place of a pathway of settlement as people moved from St. Louis and came out west. They came right through Rocheport. We were like transnational highway.
Rocheport as a transnational highway? Maybe a little more like Mexico City than I thought. While Rocheport may feel small to me, it's a hub of the area. People from nearby counties visit to access the Katy Trail and Meriwether Cafe, where you can rent bikes, hear music, and eat from a food truck along the river. People also seek out Rocheport for its antique shops, a couple of bed and breakfasts, one converted from the town historic schoolhouse, and the old general store, which serves up roots music and scoops of local ice cream. In September, Rocheport hosted a music festival called Biscuits, Beats, and Brews. The town welcomed 5,000 people for the weekend, a big increase from its typical 200 residents. The festival is especially important to its organizer, Colin Laveau. He moved to town 10 years ago and immediately felt something special here.
When I first moved to Rocheport, I saw so much potential for doing some kind of fest, and in my time here, I grew to love all of my neighbors, and I had never been boating on the Missouri River. I didn't even know that was a thing, but I became ingrained in that culture as well. It's hard not to love a place like this, and I as a part of what I try to do with this festival is try to expose what's great about this town to the world.
But organizing a music festival with over a dozen artists, food vendors, and more is not easy. In the months leading up to this big weekend, Colin found himself losing sleep, paying for expenses out of pocket, and making a 20-page parking manual. But now, on the last day of the festival, it's worth it to him for what he's able to bring to this community.
Throughout this process, I've learned a lot about myself and the people around me. Because while I put on a lot of events, I've never had this much of an insurmountable task ahead of me, and it was the most difficult thing I've done professionally in my life. I'm getting a little verklempt now. Whenever I was looking around last night, I was physically and mentally exhausted. The night before, only slept 2 hours, and then yesterday I was running on 3 hours of sleep. but to see it have worked and logistically, or to have created a safe environment, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without an immense amount of support that I normally didn't need, but in terms of volunteers, staff, you name it, to look around and see that it worked is probably one of the most professionally rewarding things that I've experienced.
Just 5 more hours. Just 5 more hours is over.
We're gonna finish strong, and I actually need to introduce the first act.
As Colin ran off to the stage, I was struck by how much genuine love he feels for this community. As I looked around, I saw people dancing, drinking, having fun. They seemed carefree. I went up to one Rocheportian, Cheryl, who looked particularly at ease.
The power and the relaxation you get from the river. I love to walk along it, and the beauty, the sounds, the lack of sounds. It's so beautiful, So I try to stay so much within walking distance of the river, and I have for 10 years.
I mean, why is it so special to you?
Because I can't make it to the ocean. I grew up next to the ocean, and this is the closest I can make it.
Oh.
In a quick, this is my fill-in for the ocean. But the river's so powerful and
Tell
so
them what
peaceful.
you call the river.
Mother.
Why do you call the river Mother?
Just because we talk. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
That one, yeah. I walk up and I say, "Hello, Mother."
You have nice conversations with you?
Yeah, we do. She has lots of nice secrets. Beautiful eagles, white cranes, all kinds of exotic snakes.
As Cheryl talked about Mother River, she seemed to glow from the inside out. I truly believe that she has a bond with the river, and this is something that I kept hearing over and over. I wanted to experience that bond, that glow. But when I looked at the river, it was hard to get over the vast darkness just threatening to swallow me whole.
I think no one appreciates the river because it kind of has the worst PR agent in the world.
Brett Duford told me he's not surprised that I'm afraid of the river.
If you really take a step back, when is the river in the news? When it's at flood stage, when someone goes missing, and that's about it. So you learn from a young age, if you were raised around the river, to stay away from it, to be quite honest. And so we sort of lack that connection, the experience of being on the river. And once you start having those experiences, you realize that this is just an absolute beautiful stretch in our own backyard that needs to be explored more. And so that's why I'm always trying to encourage people to get out there.
So, thanks to Brett, for the first time, my fear was rationalized, and, well, I felt ready to face it. I am here at the edge of the boat ramp, trying to keep my equipment safe. But I needed someone to help guide me. Thank you for granting me safe passage.
You're welcome. Come on in, have a seat, and there's your life jacket there.
Thank you. Give me 1 moment. So I called Christopher Kennedy. We heard a little bit from him in our episode about river pollution. Chris got his start at the Missouri Department of Conservation as a marine biologist.
Fisheries biologist. So marine is saltwater. I was freshwater.
Apologies, a fisheries biologist. Clearly, there is a lot I need to learn. Chris met me at the boat ramp behind a restaurant called the Station House at Catfish Katie's. It was a cold, cloudy day. He brought a speedboat, and we began to cruise the Missouri River. Right away, I could tell that Chris had a deep relationship with the river, and it felt like I was a visitor at his home, just showing up uninvited. Why the river? Why specifically this aspect of nature called to you?
I don't think I chose it. It more or less chose me. And that's because of all the interactions I had with my family. And so before I had a choice, I was always drawn to the river,
Chris comes from a long line of boaters. His father and grandfather took him on river speedboat races and taught him how to read the river, as he puts it.
My grandfather came back from Tuskegee right after World War II and was looking for a way to have fun. And when he came out of college, he and a couple of his friends started boat racing. He had a pretty good 4-year career, and then he wrecked the boat. And my grandma said, that's enough of that. But my dad continued to race. And so by the time he was 16 years old, he had broke over 3 world speed records. He raced from the time he was 8 years old all the way up until about 45, 46. And so he had a really long career. He raced all over the United States, raced in Europe. And as you can imagine, I was busy following him around and honestly wanting to race at that time just like he did.
Here, Chris reaches into his pocket and shows me newspaper clippings and photos from his dad. A clip from Ebony magazine calls Chris's dad, Butch, and grandfather, Art, a fearless father-son racing team. The photo shows a young kid in a life vest, ready to hit the water while his dad starts the engine of a slick speedboat called the Southern Lady.
Especially when I'm out here by myself. You think about all those memories, and you think about where they got the passion from to be on the water for themselves. And so I'm not only thinking about my memories, I'm thinking about the memories that my father had and the memories that my grandfather shared with me. And yeah, a lot of days I feel like they're right here with me.
I mean, do you think they'd be proud that you're protecting this place, this sacred family space, not just for them, but for everyone else to make their own family memories?
I would hope so. I always have liked bringing other people out on the river, especially people who have never been on the river before. I know they're proud of me when I do that.
Well, you got me.
Eventually, Chris pulls the boat up to the dock at Cooper's Landing. It's a popular spot for people to gather and enjoy live music. Our ride on the Missouri has come to an end. And as I head back to my car, I think back on the conversation with Professor Timothy Carson. He told me he used to love the frenetic energy of the city, but as he got older, he craved the peacefulness of the river. I'd heard this kind of story before, but it never made sense to me. Why would you abandon all a city has to offer? Professor Carson mentioned someone to me who might be able to tell me more about this choice.
There is, in Rocheport, there is a man and his wife who live in Mexico City and Rocheport equally. They live in both places. They move back and forth. And they have fascinating perspective on what it means to live in both places.
Do they speak Spanish?
Oh, yes. That's first language.
Now I knew I had to talk to this person. It took me a while to find him, but eventually...
Buenos días.
Eric Roberto Martinez found himself in Rocheport by pure chance. He was hired 2 years ago by a company in Fayette, a town that's 20 minutes away.
Yo pensaba, dije, bueno, pues lo más grandecito que hay aquí cerca de Fayette es Colombia.
The biggest city Eric could find close to Fayette, he told me, was Columbia. He was hoping to avoid the culture shock of living in a small town.
Afortunadamente no encontré ningún lugar que me gustara.
But he didn't find a place he liked. The fact he was house hunting during winter didn't help either, he said. So, Eric turned to a dot on the map called Rocheport.
No encontraba nada en Fayette, entonces dije voy a pasar a Rocheport.
Apprehensive at first, Eric decided to visit Rocheport. He saw a small home that immediately stood out to him.
One thing led to another.
And he bought the house. Still, it isn't easy acclimating from a city as chaotic as Mexico City to a town without a stoplight. But slowly, Eric started to meet people and spend time outdoors.
Tú estás en contacto directo con la naturaleza. Esa parte me fascina.
You're in direct contact with nature, Eric says. That part fascinates us. Eric says at first it was strange hearing nothing but silence for days on end instead of honking cars. But he found the Rocheport was still thriving, just in different ways.
Se llama General Store. Nos vemos todos los jueves a cenar.
Eric dines with his neighbors at the general store. He's a part of the Rotary Club, goes to music festivals, and takes walks with his wife. He found a community unlike anything he'd ever been a part of in Mexico. And, of course, the central character in this community, the river.
Y me gusta ver cómo corre el agua. Me llama mucho la atención la velocidad con la que corre el agua.
He often sits on a bench he now claims as his favorite spot. He watches the water flow past. He says he wonders about the other towns and places the river passes through.
Cosa que nos hace mucha falta en México.
It's a huge contrast to Mexico City and the canals he saw there. He said he doesn't understand why humanity doesn't take better care of nature. It's all we have.
Si viene a Rocheport, pues nos conoceremos.
Before our call ends, Eric tells me he used to be like me, addicted to the stress of city life. But he encourages me not to underestimate the beauty in small town life. The river has terrified me my whole life, but not anymore. Now I have heard everyone's voices, everyone's experiences and memories. It's like what Christopher Kennedy told me. River life is more than introspective thoughts while you float on a boat. It's cultures and histories and communities all melting into the water. They flow along with the water, and that's what makes people want to spend their lives nearby it. And who knows? Maybe one day I'll be one of them.
From the roads along the hills to the endless straight line track, the river used to own it all, and these days it's getting it back.
Thank you so much to Tadeo Ruiz for his work reporting this episode. And to you for listening. This is our last edition of Rivertown for now. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell a friend about it or reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Check out our website at columbiamissourian.com/Rivertown and see more Missouri River stories from Rivertown and beyond at newterritory.mag.com/Rivertown.
Watched it break a levee, work a house until it's gone.
Rivertown was reported by Tadeo Ruiz, Ailing Lee, Ellie Lynn, Kaylin Hellier, Olivia Mizell, Kiana Fernandez, and Abby Lee. Abigail Keel is our producer and editor. Jessica Von Martin is our project manager. Music for Rivertown comes from Gloria Atun and Jason Shaw via the Free Music Archive Creative Commons license. Our audience teams and our photo teams are led by Professor Kara Edgerson and Professor Brian Kratzer at the Missouri News Network. Special thanks to the Mississippi River Basin Ag and Water Desk. Rivertown is a collaborative project from KBIA, the Missouri School of Journalism's Missouri News Network, and the New Territory magazine. Executive producers of Rivertown are Janet Saidi and me, Tina Casagrande Foss, in partnership with PRX.